a grand plan for the farm. And the tenant thinks the landlord has a grand plan for the farm. It turns out no one really has a long-term plan for the farm. The other thing is, if you look at the value of a farm just on dollars, you wouldn't have a $1.5 million machine that you wouldn't have some kind of an operating manual with. Evolved over time. I'm working with the Iowa State College of Design, and they're taking up on agriculture, where what would a farm look like if you designed it? Well, with the transition through the years of different family members, you built the barn for 48 cows, and then the son got out of the military, so you added on and you put in another 48. And so as we look at these farms, it's not like a design problem. It's an evolution, and an evolution over time. So when it comes to conservation, we've had kind of this negative effluva that, if we're going to do things in step with the environment, we're going to practice conservation, we won't make as much money. And so what I'd like to offer you today is to revisit the farming activity on your farm, and that you use conservation to make you more money than what you would make if you weren't using conservation. So my second slide, I talk about megatrends. Everything happens so fast anymore. When we talk about strategies for conservation, most of them are 1, 2, 3, 5, 10-year plans. In fact, if you grow hybrid poplar trees, the Farm Service Agency is going to consider that a short rotation of woody crops, and they cycle. In theory, you could make more growing poplar trees than you could growing corn, but you don't have a pay date for 10 years. So one of the problems we have in doing planning as a whole farm is that we have to look at the succession plan, who's going to be working that farm in the years to come. I challenge landowners, where do you see your farm 100 years from now? 100 years from now, what do you think the activities are going to be on that farm? And then you can start to think, you could have some poplar trees, you could have some longer term crops. But what I try to do in whole system farm planning is to stretch out multiple revenue streams so that we're not just married to corn and beans only for our profit back at the farm gate. Publicly, there's a lot of information about how damaging agriculture has been to the environment. And I think nationally, there's a lot of growers that I work with that are concerned that it's kind of a bad rap, that we've made changes in our ag systems that were driven out of necessity, and they're really not recognized. We hear all of these negative things, but we don't hear, there's not a news headline that, conservation acres or cover crops were up 18% or 25%, or, it's more that negative. So I like to talk about what's right with our food system. We have 13% of our gross domestic product in the US is food, and food and farming are one system. There isn't a farming system and a food system. There's a food and farming system that we get all of our nutrients from. And it's that thin layer between heaven and earth that we call topsoil that provides all life. Yeah, I'm going to go here to slide 4. The other thing we hear about are about vertical farms. There's a vertical farm in Japan right now that's producing about 20,000 head of lettuce a day, and they're delivering it. And we hear these glowing remarks about we're going to be able to feed the cities with these vertical buildings that are all growing all of these crops. I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. If you just think about this in really simple terms, and I know you all experience this, we go out here and we get all this sunshine, we get all this rainfall, and we've got rich soil, and it's marginal. If we use the best machinery, it's marginal to make much money. If we haul that water inside, we haul that soil inside, and we use artificial lights, there's no way that we can make money with that kind of encumbrance on that system. So in Washtenaw County, as you look around, these are the latest facts from agriculture, and these would be 2017. So we'll be coming up for another 5-year census of agriculture next year. So the one prior to 2017 was in 2012. So the changes that we have over that time are reflective only up to 2017. So 76% of the county, I'm sorry, get the right one, 84% of Washtenaw County is in agriculture. It might be pasture, it may be corn and soybeans, it might be wheat, but still with all the developments we see and all the urbanization pressure, we actually gained a few farmable acres in the last 5 years, as opposed to losing acres. Acres have been converted, and that could be good or bad, depending on how you look at it. Was it wetlands that were converted into crops? You know, there's certainly that possibility. One thing I've noticed about Washtenaw County as I drive around, it certainly grows good houses. I don't know how good they are, but it certainly grows a lot of them. So it seems like, you know, when I go out and I work one-on-one with farmers about reducing phosphorus runoff into the watershed, people say, well, what about all these new houses? You know, we got urban sprawl all over the county. So in no-till and reduced till, Washtenaw County is at about 43%. If we look at what the impact is on the urbanization in 2012, on January 1st, any product that or phosphorus, it became on turf. And so I'm really encouraged with that, because as we've cleaned up the pipes hanging over the river that dump things out, and as we've built new houses, there are measures in place to have these houses be environmentally responsible. So the idea of urban agriculture has kind of been a hot topic for about the last 10 years. And it may seem that, you know, urban agriculture is growing and there's more small farmers. But in reality, the urban ag initiatives aren't a strategy for economic development. If economic occurs around urban agriculture, that's all well and fine. But in reality, it's more of a community building effort. It's a better utilization of green space in many, many cases. So urban agriculture is not going to feed the cities. We're going to continue to get our food from real farmland and foreign shores. And it's that foreign shores that's a bit troublesome when we talk about food sovereignty or food security. In Europe, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland only have 40% of their land base available to produce food for people. In other words, 60% of those three countries' food has to come from foreign shores. In the United States, we have this abundance of rich, fertile land, but yet we import $130 billion worth of food items into this country every year. So I think we're going to see more and more larger farms producing more diverse crops, but the efficiency is still going to be out in the rural areas for the most part. I have a slide in there with the facilities map that was put together by the Conservation District. And as you all know, I'm sure there's numerous efforts afoot to preserve farmland in Washtenaw County. There's about 10 authorities or jurisdictions or organizational capacity that's dedicated to preserving farmland. I think that's the right perspective to have. When I travel on farms in Europe, they say, if we'd have known that we were going to not be self-sufficient in food, we would have done things differently. When I served as executive director at the Michael Fields Ag Institute in East Troy, Wisconsin, the founders of that were from Europe, and they were trying to save U.S. agriculture from itself. They wanted to not have the same thing happen in American agriculture that happened with the European agriculture. I like to say that farmers have always done what they get paid to do. People say, well, how do you convince farmers to do things differently? Well, I've never met a farmer that didn't listen to a way to make more profit back at the farm gate. And I think from a conservation standpoint, we have to use a lens of economics to think about and implement conservation practices. I had a slide in there on our land uses. I just wanted to briefly mention that. It is slide number 8. In the last 10 years, this is 2010 to 2020, we've proportionally shifted from grasslands and pasture to corn and soybeans. And I think over a decade, that's a significant shift in cropping plans. Can't see those very good on the handouts. So my message is that, we're going to need to get better maintaining these rural farms in a way that ensures intergenerational profitability of the farm, and it ensures that the farm is doing its part for stewardship. I work a lot with landowners, and I work, with the tenants of those farms. And then there's some obviously that are landowners and operators both. But owning farmland and stewarding farmland is a serious responsibility. I work with a family in Iowa that has 7 farms. Their dad passed away, left them the farms. They've never been around the farms. They don't know what to do with the farms. And yet they want to preserve those for family ownership in perpetuity. So 75% of farmland is sold without any public knowledge. So when we think about the corporations are coming in and buying up all of our farmland, most land sale, and when investors, and I work with quite a few investors that want to buy farmland. Well, when 75% of farmland sales are never known publicly, it's pretty difficult to figure that out. I started about 10 years ago doing a talk called Water as a Crop. And during that time, DuPont decided to build a cellulosic ethanol plant in Nevada, Iowa. And Coors thought maybe they better preserve their water supply for the future. DuPont was interested in water as a crop because they were building this cellulosic ethanol plant that still is not in operation, probably never will be. It's on the market for $368 million if you want to, close out sale on it. Cellulosic ethanol has always been, 5 years away. That was true 20 years ago, it was true 15 years ago, and today they're saying cellulosic ethanol is about 5 years away. So they they trademarked water as a crop. And they told me I couldn't talk about water as a crop because they trademarked that name. Well, that project all fizzled and failed. But I do think we have to think about water as a crop. It's a crop when we don't have it. It's a crop that pays. It's a crop that, if we focused on the water the way we focused on that next hot corn hybrid, I think we could manage our water better. I think I mentioned that statistic earlier. I do a lot of work in Iowa, and Iowa doesn't come close to this in any county I work in, but no-till, reduced till in Washtenaw County is at 43%. That's a big number. And that means a lot of guys are doing a lot of things right in their farming practices. So if you look at that, probably 4 out of the last 5 years, we've gone 30 days or more with not a significant amount of rainfall. When we have years now that we have 45, 50 inches of rain, which, we've been in a 32, 34-inch rainfall belt forever. Now we're getting 45 inches of rain, and in the middle of that, we get a drought. And so how do we manage around that drought? And I would suggest to you that the way we do that is, we're going to focus on the health of the farm as opposed to maximizing that single crop. It's less important to have a record yield than it is to have record low expenses on that crop and maximum resilience and ways to manage that risk. So, when we grow a crop, we've got the risk of the fertility, we've got the risk of the rain, the heat for the corn, the amount of sunlight it takes. Year in, year out, every year is different, and the best crop you'll ever grow is the one you're going to grow next year, right? So we have to look at how do we manage these other components. I work with a composting firm out of Yorkville, Illinois. Some years, there are guys that have been spreading a couple of ton of compost, have a significant yield increase. And other years where they spread compost, there's no difference in yield. And they couldn't figure out why that was happening. And so when we did the research and tied it all back, it came down to weather. If you didn't have enough water during the growing season, like when that corn's shooting, then the compost held more water in the soil and you got over that hump. We've seen these soybeans out here suffering. 28 days into that drought in the summer, like last 2 weeks of July and first week of August, those beans are struggling pretty hard. They're not rooted that deep. So if you had applied some compost and you're holding more water, it might just be enough to get those beans over the hump, get them over that dry spell, and keep your production up where need be. I put below that slide of water as a crop of the watershed. And when we organize solutions in the land, we organized around watersheds. When we do a whole system farm plan, we look at the watershed that we're in. What is the impact the watershed has on us, and what impact do we have on the watershed downstream? So when we hear public criticism of our farm system being leaky, well, if we're keeping as much of that water as possible on the farm, we're not nearly as leaky. When we're getting 45 inches of rain, that water has to go somewhere. So with extended crop rotations, with composting and some things like that, you're going to get better water infiltration. I've been around the county for the last 2 days, and I don't think anybody needs any water right now. You seem to have an abundance of it. But we have to manage both sides of that equation. How do we better manage our farm, our soils for too much water, and how do we manage it for not enough? And certainly those things have impact on the watershed. There was a gentleman that worked for a fertilizer company, and when he retired, he said, now I can finally start telling the truth about fertility and agriculture now that I don't work for a fertilizer company. He said that if we are successful, we will in almost every case be environmentally acceptable. And so if you look at our NP and K major nutrient requirements, that's probably holds true pretty well. So nitrogen, you may have noticed that nitrogen prices went up a little bit. That's on slide 13. I don't have that good of a memory, but I do remember when nitrogen was 18 cents a pound. and right now it's $1 a pound. We're going to spend $100 more per acre on a corn acre next year to raise corn. $100 more than what we spent this year. And that $100 is for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. So our project with Huron River Watershed Council is to reduce phosphorus runoff into our Huron River, the Raisin River, into Lake Erie. So if we need 250 pounds of nitrogen, we're going to have $250 just in nitrogen. In time, we pay $100 an acre for the seed, and we pay $200 an acre for the rent. You know, for that $600 or $800 gross revenue crop, it's not very pretty. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on nitrogen today, but we have 77% nitrogen in the air. And that nitrogen is very happy being in the air. It's N2. Their nitrogen molecules are tied up with each other. They don't come out of the air very easily. Lightning does that. And that's why when we get a good old fashioned lightning storm comes through, your grass turns greener, because that shock, that electrical shock, breaks into a part and it goes to the ground. So all of the nutrients that we concern ourselves with in NP and K are more useful the longer they are in the ground. And why is that? Because they all have to go through microbes before they can be assimilated for plant uptake. So when we have phosphorus in the soil and we tie up with clay particles, it's not available, and we can add more phosphorus and we can get a response. But what about using that phosphorus that's already there? Most phosphorus comes from rock. Rocks dissolve. If you find a rock in your field or in an undisturbed area like a fence row and you turn the rock over, it's flat on the bottom. It's flat because it's dissolving. Phosphorus continues to dissolve and it continues to grow. So Liebig was the scientist that said we have to look at nutrients like barrel staves, and we can only produce a yield consistent with the lowest barrel stave. So if phosphorus is your low availability item, it doesn't help you to put on 250 pounds of nitrogen because you're going to be limited by your lowest level. That's what we've been taught. That's what all the universities taught. And it's wrong. It's just simply wrong. And it's not the way we should be looking at our farm. We need to look at available P2O5, available phosphorus. And when you get your soil samples, you'll see you've got a P1 and a P2, and that's going to reflect more about the available phosphorus. So yeah, we've got to be concerned about the macronutrients, nitrogen, potash, and phosphorus, but we need to be conscious of magnesium levels. Magnesium will inhibit or block the uptake of phosphorus in your plants, and it's relatively easy to break those bonds. There's a lot of different ways to get there, but essentially what we need to get to is higher microbial populations in our soil, higher numbers of Azotobacter van Lande, which is a nitrogen fixing bacteria. We've been taught that it is only Rhizobia bacteria that converts atmospheric nitrogen to plant available nitrogen. But it turns out there's about 10 other microbes that are free living. And by that, I mean they're not dependent on the crop that you're growing. When you grow a legume crop like soybeans, peas, beans, garbanzo beans or chickpeas, all of those legumes are inoculated, or your soil's been inoculated, so the Rhizobia bacteria will fix nitrogen. But we've ignored the free living bacteria that will also fix nitrogen. And that takes multiple years to build those up. Your soil health, as you hear now on so much of what the USDA is promoting with cover crops, is to increase those available nutrients through healthier soils. So if you um, extend your crop rotation, and I know a lot of farmers in this area have wheat as a rotation crop, and wheat does a multitude of things. But one of the things that it can do for you is give you a window in early August where that field is going to be bare, and you could spread compost, or you could make amenities, or you can grow a cover crop to enhance the nutrients in the soil. So I had somebody at the University of Wisconsin told me that I went to the wrong school because this isn't true about phosphorus. The amount of phosphorus in our ground is not increasing all the time. But for some reason, all the lab tests I take, it shows that our phosphorus levels are going up. And, you know, when Dad was spreading super phos, we didn't realize it was going to take so long to break down and start making that available. I was part of a trial we did at the University of Wisconsin for 10 years. We looked at drawdown of phosphorus. So we didn't put any phosphorus on the plots for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, we had more phosphorus on our lab tests than what we had when we started. And so the drawdown myth is just that. In 2019, we had continued rains. I think we had about 1.6 million acres of corn that never got planted in the Maumee River in Ohio watershed. So the amount of phosphorus being discharged into Lake Erie that year theoretically would go down considerably because of cover crops being planted instead of corn. However, in 2019, the phosphorus levels going in Lake Erie stayed the same. So we call that legacy phosphorus, but we have phosphorus in our shed downstream. So if we quit using phosphorus today, we would still have a load of phosphorus going into Lake Erie for a period of time. And no one has been able to really extrapolate that and say, here's the day that the last polluting phosphorus is going to go into Lake Erie. It is a long-term problem. It's long-term planning, it's long-term management. 40, 50 years ago, there was a problem with phosphorus in Lake Erie, and we're farming differently. We use far more conservation practices in our tillage. We don't see a lot of moldboard plowing anymore. We see a lot of winter cover staying on these fields. We're not going to see a short-term drop of phosphorus that corresponds with that. So I think there's going to be probably some investigation on why nitrogen prices are the way they are. And I don't know if you've booked your fertilizer for next year, but it's certainly going to give us a reason to look at alternative ways to get nitrogen and phosphorus in our fields. And I contend that most fields I look at have enough phosphorus in them already. We just need to release that phosphorus and make it available for the plant. So the next slide I have in there is from the Huron River Watershed Council's website and the project that we have called Whole Farms for Clean Water. And I think we started talking about this 5 or 6 years ago, and we submitted a grant application, and we were awarded a grant to work directly one-on-one with farmers to reduce phosphorus loading in our watersheds. We can't strip phosphorus out by itself and design a plan without looking at the other nutrients and the other micronutrients as well. I mentioned cover crops. I've been working with a cover crop called sun hemp, and supposedly sun hemp is a zone 7 to 9 crop. I'm growing it in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is zone 4 probably with the influence of the lake. It does perfectly well. I'm not here to stump for sun hemp, but I can tell you that it roots down 10 to 12 feet. It loves dry weather. And as everything else is wilting down, the sun hemp is going to town. Sun hemp, it turns out, is a legume. it fixes about 40 pounds of nitrogen, and it brings up 100 pounds of soil. So if I can mine my farm for potash, I'm never going to get corn to take that potash out of the soil that's down 10 or 12 feet. If I can get 100 pounds of that to come to the surface, that's real money. That's I don't have to send a check in for that fertilizer, and I can get that fertilizer. But what we have to do is we have to think about our farm differently. We can't use the barrel stave theory and manage those nutrients correctly. We can do tissue tests anymore. We can see what is missing in the plant. Tissue tests are relatively inexpensive. And if we do a tissue test on corn that says we're short on we can go side dress that corn. You know, we've got big equipment now with drip lines on them. We can go out and we can amend that corn. We still have time to save it. We're convenience farming to, you know, put all of our nutrients down in the fall so that when that warm breeze blew out of the south next March 1st of April, we could run out there and plant. Well, it's really not important to be out there the first day planting. We still have time. You can scale. What the corn breeders have done is they've given us hybrids that will produce as much corn in a shorter season. So we don't have to, you know, try to get 117-day corn out here to top the yield targets. Can't hardly read my own slide here. So you know, we hear in the headlines about the dissolved phosphorus, but the reality is we've made a lot of changes at the farm level in the last 10 years. I don't, and Rick and I have talked about this, and Megan, you know, it's farmers don't get credit for, I don't know of a single farmer that got up in the morning and said, you know, I want to go out and buy $1 a pound nitrogen and puke it out into the watershed. We have to make our purchased amendments to the soil or fertility plan or nutrient management plan has to be around utilizing the maximum that we already have out in the field. We've depleted soils from about 4%, 5% organic matter. Forgot to turn that thing off. We've gone from 4-5% organic matter down to 2% organic matter. And so we lose water holding capacity. For each percent of organic matter you have in your soil, you will hold 16,000 gallons of water. So if you have 4% organic matter, you have about 64,000 gallons of water holding capacity in your soil. You know, if you were to put a 64,000 gallon tank out in the field, it would almost seem to take up that acre. I like to say the best place to harvest water and the best place to store water is on your farm. So we can improve the soil health and we can improve the water holding capacity of the soil, scale back on these other nutrients or on the overload of other nutrients. So I think I already mentioned in the phosphorus reduction, the homeowners in the urban areas can no longer put phosphorus. So if we go out and we detect phosphorus in the water, it's area about 25% of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. 25% come from livestock and 75% comes from row crops. Yes, sir.
What do you mean homeowners can no longer put phosphorus on their lawns? Are you referring to like a company that sprays the lawn so it looks nice throughout the summer? What about an individual that can go to Lowe's or a fertilizer company and buy a bag of NPK, you know, whatever the analysis may be, and he spreads that. What are you saying?
Can you repeat the question to you and just repeat it?
Okay, so the question is, in the state of Michigan, it is a state law. In the state of Michigan, basically, the law went into effect January 1st of 2012. And it says that you as a homeowner or you as a business or whatever, you cannot add anything to your grass, your turf, that has available P2O5. So now if you go to Lowe's and you buy a bag of fertilizer that's got P2O5, it is illegal as a homeowner or whoever. You have to get an exemption. So if you want to put down phosphorus, you can get an exemption if you're aligned in certain other practices. I don't know if you want to speak to that. I don't know about enforcement. I don't think there's,
Municipalities in the county know that.
I don't know.
Why the county or the conservation isn't directing their attention to the municipalities notifying homeowners that it is illegal for phosphorus. Simply because of the runoff.
So the question is, how broad is the awareness of the law that says you cannot put phosphorus on turf grass? I've been working in Washtenaw County for 5 or 6 years. And as we were sitting around our project, which is whole farms for clean water, I said, my farmers are complaining about 2 things. That's people are building houses all over the farmland. And the other is, yeah, I can control my phosphorus runoff, but what about the homeowners that are running off phosphorus? And my team members quickly said, no, we changed that law. That law says you cannot put down phosphorus on turf grass anymore. And realistically, I would say homeowner runoff was a big problem prior to that. I know the Huron River Watershed Council has, I think it's on the website. I don't know how it's shared. But it's, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that, the good news doesn't make the news. And the bad news makes the news. And I've had so many farmers tell me, we just feel like we're beat up in the press. We've been out here, we're trying to make a living. We're trying to pay the bank loan. We're trying to control the inputs the best we can from a financial standpoint. And we hear in the press that we're just raping and pillaging the environment. And it's, so I think there is a narrative between urban and rural areas that hasn't been had. I think there's a message, and I think Huron River Watershed Council did an article, kind of the good news on ag. And I think there's a lot of good news out there that really hasn't made it. While we're on that subject, the phosphorus reduction, which is, let me go back a little bit. We launched our project for whole farms for clean water 3-4 years ago. And we have a grant where we can pay farmers to reduce the amount of phosphorus they're running off. And it was tricky. We worked with developing the model to make predictions of how much phosphorus runoff we would reduce with certain practices. And we came up with a list of things that we could do, these practices. We couldn't get there with the single message of you need to reduce phosphorus runoff. We have to look at it as from a system. What is your farming system? And quite frankly, in the last 2 years that I've spent working with farmers in the county, I'm quite impressed with the level of knowledge of nutrient management. and I won't pick on Iowa today, but uh, when I work in Iowa, it's just a whole different ballgame in terms of the amount of waste and runoff and plowed up waterways and lack of filter strips. And I think it's because Michigan jettisons out into one big lake that we call Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. It's really a peninsula out there, and pretty much all water, goes to the lakes. And I think there's been an awareness of that as a part of our history, part of our evolution of agriculture. We have a stewardship respect for the water. And I would say, Michigan farmers are higher than any place I've worked with in regards to being safe with the water that's leaving the farm. And Iowa ranks 49th in conservation. I'm not sure where Michigan ranks. I don't know if any of you have had a crop why don't we put down a little extra phosphorus just in case you hit one of those years, you're going to have 300 bushel corn. So let's buy some insurance. Let's put a little extra nitrogen. Let's put a little extra phosphorus. All my life I've heard about building soil. Oh, let's invest in the farm. Let's build the soil. When you are building the soil as a strategy in your nutrient management plan, you're putting money in nobody's bank. You're putting money in a place that nobody can get it back. And in the case of phosphorus, it's going to be there for a long time. It's going to be around for a long time. And we've proven again and again that we need to focus on the available phosphorus, not how many pounds we're putting down this year, because the crop takes this amount out and therefore we got to put this out. Plus we're going to put a little extra to build our fertility. We're just not doing it. Yes, you can take a piece of land and you can put too few nutrients on it and you can pull down the nutrients of that farm and not replace them. And it's understandable that landowners want to be comfortable and confident that we're replacing the nutrients that we're taking out. But we don't really know what we're taking out because phosphorus just keeps becoming more available and there seems to be more of it. Interesting, I have these slides in here that shows an aerial shot of Lake Erie and the phosphorus. I can show you a map of Florida where they mine the phosphorus and the water looked just like Lake Erie mines phosphorus in the state of Florida in the Peace River Valley. And the governor just released another 18,000 acres to be surface mined so they can satisfy the desire of corn growers to have more phosphorus. So they've had two disasters. One's in Manatee County. A lot of that went into the aquifer. The famous one was at Mulberry, Florida, where Mosaic had a phosphorus lake. It's a big green lake. And there was a sand sink. I don't know what you call it. It's not a mine sink. It was just Florida sand, and they had a sink, and the whole thing disappeared into the aquifer. And some of the farmers were optimistic that they were just going to be able to use their irrigation water and get plenty of phosphorus. But the irony of this is, and I tell these guys in Florida, down in Florida, we're fighting Mosaic strip mining and polluting all the water with the phosphorus just because the strip mining operation is so messy. And then they're shipping it up here so we can put it over in Lake Erie. But the reality is we just need to be informed and aware of what the capability of our farm is and what we're doing, what we're adding is the correct amount. So the 4 R's around, fertility management is, the right amount in the right place at the right time. So Don Williams was this guy's name, and not the singer. And he said that, when the Pilgrims came over, the Native Americans showed him how to grow corn. And they said, well, you cut the fish up and you put the fish in the hole where you're going to grow the corn. You don't cut the fish up and throw them all over the field. And then you take a part of the fish and you put it in the ground and you plant the seed and you have grandma step on it because she's not too heavy anymore and she won't compact it too badly. And he says, they showed us how to do that in the 1600s. Where the hell did we go wrong? Now we're throwing the fish all over the field and doing all kinds of things. So, the right kind. Structurally, most companies have been set up to give deep discounts for fall applications, so they're not bottlenecked in the spring. But realistically, the guys that are probably the leanest on fertilizer are probably side dressing. And I hate to side dress fertilizer. But still in all, that's kind of where the corn needs it. I lived in Garden City, Kansas for 4 years, and out there they have 185 bushel corn average on sugar sand. They run the center pivot irrigations around 15 times. Every time the center pivot goes around, it gives the corn a little taste of nitrogen and a tiny bit of phosphorus. And they know that in that sugar sand, those nutrients are going to leave. And so they don't put on any more than what the corn can take up quickly. And I Kansas farmers that they're able to produce the amount of corn they do on sugar sand. The water's running out. It's the Ogallala aquifer. It's a temporary situation. They won't be in the game much longer. They're also building up the salt in their soil, and the soils are becoming sodic or saline. I guess we are here in saline, aren't we? I wonder what the origins of the name is. So on our program, I've kind of skipped around here. It took us a couple of years to figure, and it took us some time to get the methodology. But I have a one-page questionnaire sheet I use now with growers, and we look at the practices that you have and what you have been doing and ways that you can better utilize your nutrients. And we kind of do a whole nutrient management plan, looking at your operations, looking at soil tests, and seeing what makes sense. I don't advocate that any farmer decrease their profits back to the farm gate, trying to save the environment. I think the approach has to be, we're going to maximize our yields, minimize our expenses. We can make $1 by not buying something, and that dollar spends just as well as an extra $1 we got for the corn. So I think we have to look at it that way. I think on the western part of the state, blueberry farmers I'm working with, they ran into this wall about 5 years ago where there just wasn't enough revenue coming off these blueberries to support the feeding programs. I've got farmers I've worked with. We've cut down from 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre on blueberries to 25 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And it's a matter of the right place, the right time, et cetera. So if you're interested in our project, I can work with you directly, and we look at your farm operation and what you're doing and what could be tweaked or changed. And then we can make a prediction about nutrient loss based on a whole lot of smart people that put a lot of data together, and we put it into a model and it comes out with a number. And but typically somewhere between $15, $20 an acre is what we've been able to reimburse growers to reduce phosphorus. And I think 2022 is our last year on this grant. We would like to continue the program if we can, now that we've kind of figured it out a little bit. And if we can continue, the one thing that we've talked about is if we do, we're making a multiple year stipend for the phosphorus reduction. So with that, I'd like to open up for questions. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll be the steward of the mic.
Well, it seems like everything you've said about traditional farming, you have a monoculture, one plant planted in the field, and they're annual plants. And even with no-till, you still have to work the soil up a bit. And you need to make some money out of it. I don't see any way that you can continue with monoculture annual plants and keep the soil healthy over the long run. So maybe you could give me some support on denying that.
Oh, boy. I thought I'd give you some time to consider it.
Okay, so the question is, how can we continue to raise corn and beans as a monoculture and make any money doing it? So with the new technology in corn planters, there's a thing called the seed firmer. And the seed firmer goes goes in between the disc, and it looks at the moisture of the soil, and in theory, it firms the seed bed and it gives you better seed for your corn. So what's happened with that is when you take a soil sample annually and you send it in, you have one spot where you look at organic matter. Now, if you take, multiple holes and you put them all together and you test, you have one data point for organic matter. And I didn't talk any about sequestering carbon today. It's kind of a can of worms, but we have companies out here today like Indigo, not to mention names, trying to say that we're sequestering carbon growing 200 bushels of corn. Well, how do you measure carbon? You measure it by organic matter. What's the organic matter doing? Well, we don't know, because we don't know that we took the sample in the same place this year as we took it last year. And if we only annually test one test for soil organic matter, SOM, we don't know if we're gaining or losing really. And so when they came out with these seed farmers, one of the unintended consequences is it gives you a reading on organic matter. It gives you a live, on the ground reading of organic matter through the whole field. So now we have maybe 10,000 data points for organic matter. Next year, we plant the same field with our monoculture. And we notice that the organic matter on average with 10,000 data points went from 2.2 to 2.1. Well, if your organic matter goes down, you're not sequestering carbon. And if you're growing corn, your organic matter is going down. And once it gets down to about 1.8 or 2.0, you can't get it any lower. There's nothing you can do to get it lower. And I don't know why, but it seems to settle out there, even if it's 10-year continuous corn. So when Indigo says, pay us for the 2 tons of carbon we're sequestering growing corn, to validate that, which they're charging most of the money for the carbon credit goes to them for validating you put that amount of carbon down. Well, if you can have a seed farmer or any kind of electronic device that gives you 10,000 data points across the field, you can tell whether your organic matter is going up or down. In Western Iowa, a farmer called me up. He said, on my seed farmers this year, I gained 1/10 of a point from having a cover crop last year on my beans. So he actually moved the organic matter up 0.1%. He was pretty thrilled with that. Well, his organic matter had been going down every year, and now it's starting to go back up. It's intergenerational to build organic matter in your soil. If your soils were 6% organic matter and today they're 3%, you're not going to see 4 probably in your lifetime. You can move it up 1/10 of a point or 2/10 of a point, and slowly you can move that up over time, but it takes a long time to build organic matter. And there's a grazing specialist that gets up and says you can intensive graze ground and you can go from 2% organic matter to 6% organic matter in a single year. That didn't happen. That didn't happen anywhere. It doesn't happen. You can't put that amount. If you accept that you have 4 million pounds of topsoil in every acre, to get 1% of organic matter, you need 40,000 pounds of organic matter added to that field. And so where's that 40,000 pounds of organic matter going to come from? It's not going to come out of that fertilizer buggy. And so if the more you diversify the crop, the better chance you have of building organic matter. Now, I know a lot of you hay, when you take hay off the ground, you're going to take a fair amount of P2O5 and you're going to take a fair amount of potash off the field. And we have to replace those, otherwise we will deplete that soil. But our nutrient management plan needs to address how much nutrients we're really taking off, how much are available, and how much do we need to put back and in what form. So the answer to your question is, if I grow nothing, I'm out the rent on the land, right? I've lost $200, I'm paying $200 an acre. So if I grow nothing, well, if I go into prevent plant, I'd get about 75% of my corn revenues. And I know some farmers in Illinois that went prevent plant 2 years in a row. And then the next year they went organic and they had a weedy mess. But that's not a knock on organics or organic production system. It's that when you give up chemicals and you come out of a heavy chemical regimentation, you'll get weeds growing on your farm that you've never seen before. You'll see weed pressure like you've never seen it before. But we've got a farm in Kenosha that we've done essentially nothing. To convert from the corn soybean rotation, we planted oats as a nurse crop and we put in hay, and we've hayed it for the last 4 years. And the soil's finally coming around to where we think we can work with it. But it had been intensively farmed, worked wet for 20 years. The soil was in terrible shape. It wasn't absorbing water, it wasn't holding water. I think the only hope we have of making money in farming systems in the future is identifying markets that are stable and we can get paid for a crop that I think we have to market the crop and then go grow it. And we don't do that with corn and beans. We don't market the crop and grow it. We grow it and then we go look for a market. So I was talking earlier about, I worked with a farm in Western Michigan. We grew Milo one year and on a field that had some restrictions. He marketed it to the local bird feed manufacturer, got a contract, and he's been growing Milo ever since. Milo is a poor man's crop. If you can grow corn, you grow corn. If you can't, you can grow Milo. Well, he's making more money on his Milo than he's ever made on his corn, but he's producing for a market. Now, I'm not here to say that those markets are widespread and there's easy access to those markets, but we need to market what the buyer wants to buy. And then we need to look at our production capacity and what we can do. We're going to produce a lot of sun hemp seed. Sun hemp seed's selling for like $1 a pound. That's more than corn. So we're going to produce some sun hemp and sell to seed. And that market will probably go away from us in the next 3 or 4 years. And we're going to be looking at, what are the other crops that could be grown? Okay. And rye just, it smothers out so many weeds. Rye is a wonderful crop, except nobody wants to buy it. And then if you can sell it for seed, that's been a good market. These markets are very dynamic. And once you get out of the mainstream of corn and beans, there's not a lot of options. Patrick and I have worked on developing some wheat markets over here. We got Jiffy just down the road a little bit. There's a lot of wheat produced or processed, but most of it comes from Canada. And MSU tells us we can't grow wheat in Michigan. And so we accept that we can't grow wheat, but we can grow wheat. But we need to grow the wheat that buyers want to buy. And we truthfully, I've tried spring wheat in Washtenaw County twice and it failed both times. And I'm convinced that spring wheat is a challenge. Winter wheat is not as big of a challenge, but we need to diversify our markets. We need to use German genetics that come out of high rainfall areas. And we got to get away from the Western wheats that are developed in arid climates. And we've got to grow wheat that buyers want to buy. And typically it's based on protein and gluten strength and what the baking industry calls a falling number. And if anybody's interested and want to see me afterwards, I can go through that. But there are buyers that will buy our wheat at a premium price, but we have to produce the soft winter wheat we're growing is a feed market or an export market, and it doesn't have the value, even though wheat is pretty good prices now. I think oats on the board are pretty good price right now. But we have to find, oats has been one of my favorites. It doesn't cost much to grow a field of oats. And if you do it with good agronomic practices, you can raise 100 bushel oats. If you get $5 a bushel for oats, that's $500 an acre, and you have almost no cost. You've got a little cost. You've got a little time and seed cost, but a year prior. But thankfully, we're not using 5 pounds of atrazine anymore on the corn, so it doesn't wipe our oats out quite so bad. So, other questions? Oh, I'm in trouble. Nick, do you have any questions?
I don't, Ron. Great talk though. I don't have any questions coming in through the chat either. We lost you a little bit during the presentation because of the wind, we figured, but we got your back. Great work, Megan. Any more questions over there in Saline?
I think we need 2 mics.
Ron, you talked about pulling nitrogen out of the air. These biostimulant products that are coming out now, do you have any take on those? Have you seen any results from them or anything?
So the question is, have I observed a positive efficacy of biological products that the market suddenly is flooded with everywhere and all kinds of claims going out? Locust is selling a microbial product that's Trichoderma harzianum. And Trichoderma harzianum was discovered by a Cornell researcher back in 1972. When I worked for the Japanese, we did extensive testing with Trichoderma harzianum, and we found that it helped the seed germinate a little better, but we couldn't find any values beyond that. So biologicals and microbials that I've been involved with for the last 40 years have a reputation of being snake oil. And the reason they have a reputation of being snake oil is most of them are snake oil. So when you can go out and hype Trichoderma harzianum, it's been sold as T22 forever, and some of you may have run into it in the marketplace. You can get T22 and you could treat your crops, and maybe you could see a little difference and maybe you couldn't. Now, that said, there are some good biological products out there, and they kind of get lost in the shuffle. But a good biological product out there now should be able to put on its label that it has 20 million CFUs, which is colony forming units per milliliter of water. You need 20 million. More is not better. If someone sells you a biological product and says it has 120 million CFUs of Azotobacter vinale, there's not going to be much else in there, because Azotobacters, when they get at those levels, they literally own the consortium. So the trick of a consortium of microbes is you want microbes that are compatible, can live together, and you can put them in the soil and they're ready to go to work, and you can then identify them. So actinomycetes is another hot one. Actinomycetes is a bacteria that's used to make streptomycin, erythromycin, and a lot of antibiotics for human consumptions. Microbes, people, plants all evolved at the same time together. We have about 8 pounds of microbes in and on our bodies that we would die if we didn't have. A baby's born with no microbes, no biome at all, and the mother's milk starts to provide the basis for the biome that the baby would develop. Is it any wonder that we haven't been able to make human milk for babies? We've always failed to be able to come up with a formula because we don't have the microbes and we don't have the mother's microbes. And so you have to be really careful. I'm working with a researcher at the University of Illinois who's now come out with some microbes. I have a big chart from Washington State University. And we are only seeing the tip yet right now of where we can go with biologicals. Biologicals bring a lot of promise, but they bring a lot of hanky-panky along with them. Yes, sir. CFU stands for colony forming units. So microbes are identified what they call phenotypic identification, and there's more and more labs now that will test for that. This lab in Georgia is called Waters Lab, and they're now testing products. And they're going to just blow the doors off these biologicals because they can do phenotypic identification, they can do quantity, and they can tell you exactly what's in this biological that you're paying an arm and a leg for. The other one that's into bios is Monsanto. They have a biological webpage. They have excellent research. And no, I'm not a fan of Monsanto, but I can tell you that all of the chemical companies know about biologicals and they're all poised and ready to put them on the market if they have to. They don't want to because they can make more selling the chemical products than they can selling the biologicals. But there's an actinomycetes that kills insects. And that company that discovered it sold the technology to Bayer for $450 million. The bacteria spinosad, it's naturally occurring, and they patented it, and that's quite controversial that you could patent a natural occurring event. But I think they get $800 a quart for spinosad, and they market it as Intrust, and the blueberry guys use a lot of it for spotted wing Drosophila. But it works, it really works, and it works as an insecticide, but you can buy almost any other insecticide cheaper. So Bayer doesn't really want to market that. They don't really want to market biologicals. That's what we have on the one side of thing. And on the other side of things, you know, we've still got some long-haired sandaled friends of Jesus that are throwing some things together and calling it, you know, a silver bullet for agriculture. And it's, you know, a lot of junk. There's a lot of junk out there.
So,
Well, everyone, I think the meeting was wrapping up. I have been in conversation with Megan throughout the presentation through text, and I've alerted her that we've been frozen and dropped once again. No response, but I believe she was wrapping up right there. So we're gonna wrap it up as well here. Thank you so much for coming. You will receive a survey in your email sometime next week. We appreciate the feedback. Again, this was our first hybrid event. And the weather, if you're here in Washtenaw, wasn't the greatest overnight and continues to be very windy today. So combination of technology and weather, most likely, with the issues today. But thank you so much for coming. We appreciate the feedback. You will also get a PDF of slides as well. So yes, happy holidays and stay safe, everyone. Hope to talk to you soon.